Hello, it's Christopher Coles. If you're hearing this, it means that the paperback and ebook are out. If you want to support the show, this is the best way to do it. You can go to readchristophercoles.com/CAHL. All of the information is there. The link will be in the description. Check it out if you'd like. Let's get on with the show. So there were a number of scenes that were deleted from A Cold and Heartless Lullaby, and we're going to get into one of them now, an entire chapter that was cut very late in production. This was originally going to be Chapter 3, and it would have been the reader's first introduction to Beatrix and Graham. There was no music or sound effects added. It was just the dialogue and the narration, and even some of the extras weren't there, so it was up to me to fill in some of those roles for this temporary cut. But it never saw the light of day, and there's a number of reasons why, but before we get into that, let's take a listen.
Chapter 3, 179 years and 7 months before the collapse. A horde of seagulls squawked distantly as Graham sauntered down the cobbled market street. Rich fumes from food and reeds alike wafted in a haze all around him. Women passed by in their bobbing dresses and feathered hats, linked arm in arm with their lovers, their parasols crowding in the traffic-choked streets. Nearby, a man shouted himself hoarse, advertising his smoked salmon. His competition shouted louder. Graham smirked to himself, hands deep in the pockets of his white school uniform as he took in the chaos. Chaos made swiping things easy. With feigned surprise, Graham collided into a fruit cart. Apples rolled out into the street. The vendor called out in annoyance, and Graham, playing the part of a clueless teenager, dodged passing feet and carts while he scrambled to pick them up. He gave profuse apologies rapid fire and returned the apples to their place. "Watch where you're going, kid," the vendor cried. Graham was already well on his way, with his hands in his pockets and a look of satisfaction on his face. When he was around the corner, he pulled out his new apple and gave it a lazy toss in the air, watching it spin before he caught it again and took a bite. Shame, Graham thought, adjusting his glasses. It's a green one. Regardless, as he made his way to the meetup location, the score put a little pep in his step. To think, he considered, I would have been holed up in a stuffy classroom right now, losing my mind with boredom. He felt the chips in his pocket, rubbing the cold metal edges of the coins. And school doesn't pay nearly as well. Beatrix was waiting for him at the street corner, her bare arms crossed as she leaned against a street lamp with a discolored glass reed smoking between her lips. Her smooth, dark skin contrasted brilliantly with the streaks of bright orange dye in her frizzy dreads. She gave him a knowing smile as he approached.
"How did it go?"
she asked, eyebrow raised as she plucked the reed from her mouth. Graham shook his pocket.
"You hear that?"
he said, his mouth half full of apple.
You have coins in your pockets.
Graham swallowed.
That is the sound of sweet success.
Then I take it that it went well.
Beatrix stepped down from her perch, landing with a clack from her boots.
When that old lady saw the knife, oh, you should have seen her face. Forked over the chips immediately.
An old lady. That's hardly a difficult target.
Beatrix said.
Well, it's my first time.
Graham explained, trying to get closer to her without making it obvious.
Besides, old ladies always carry way too much coin for their own good.
A Tret rattled past on its treads, interrupting the conversation as its driver took a family to their destination. They gawked at the passing market from under the shade of a tarp.
Anyway, what I'm saying is...
He whipped out an 80 flat chip.
I got the goods.
Beatrix choked on her fumes.
Oh, unholy riot!
She grabbed the octagonal coin and held it up to her eye, peeking through the glass center.
She was carrying an 80?
In a single motion, Graham was behind her, one hand over her shoulder and the other plucking the coin from her fingers.
I told you they carry way too much.
"That's him!"
an elderly voice cried. Graham turned to face the same old lady he had just mugged with 3 of Soul's enforcers surrounding her. The tall, brawny monks towered over her, the gold lining in their pristine white robes gleaming in the sunlight.
Rot!
Graham cursed. He broke out into a sprint, Beatrix close behind. The enforcers' slacks swished as they made chase in the bustling street.
You were followed?
Beatrix cried, pushing over a cart as she passed by it. Canned goods spilled out all over the path and the enforcers had to force their way through it. One of them slipped and hit the cobbles.
I didn't think she would go to the law!
Graham shouted in defense.
What do you mean? What do you think she'd do?
Further up the street, some recruiters had their booth set up and were calling out the usual propaganda. Join the war efforts! Secure the rifts! Graham made sure to flip their table specifically, grinning as he did it. Posters and papers went fluttering into the air as they cried out in surprise. Beatrix called out.
They're catching up!
Graham glanced back to see all three enforcers sprinting in tandem, not one of them showing a hint of strain on their faces. These guys are troopers, Graham thought. They needed a better escape. Luckily, Beatrix was already on it. Without breaking her stride, she leaped onto the next passing tret. With significantly less grace, Graham climbed up after her. Its passenger, an old reverend priest in white robes, cried out in shock. "What are you doing? What is this?" he sputtered. Graham climbed over to the front seat and brandished his knife to the driver's neck.
Hey, I have a knife. Go faster, please,
Graham said. Nodding frantically, the driver pushed his levers forward. Beatrix leaned out the rear-facing seats, watching the enforcers keep chase as the tret lurched forward. "Run, my brothers!" the reverend cried. "Hurry!"
Pipe down, you old goose!
Beatrix jeered. The tret took a sharp turn, each tread moving in opposite directions as it rounded the corner. The Wicker River ran along next to them, its clear waters bubbling playfully as leisure boats floated under the bridges and down the river. "I won't stand for this," the reverend blubbered. "Saul will not look kindly on your deeds today. No, indeed."
Hey, Graham, I think this goose wants to go for a swim.
Beatrix laughed, kicking the hollering reverend into the river. One of the enforcers split off to help as the old priest flailed in the water. The tret began to slow. Graham had turned to yell at the driver when he noticed three more enforcers in the road ahead of them.
Beatrix, a swim actually sounds like a pretty good idea right about now.
Beatrix turned to see them.
Right!
Grinding gravel, the tret screeched to a halt and the driver dove out, using the distraction as an opportunity to escape. With enforcers closing in on both sides, Graham stepped off of the tret, looking frantically for an escape route, but before he had a chance to think, Beatrix had grabbed him by the arm and leaped off the curb. Together they crashed into a little white boat, toppling its formerly happy couple into the river. The boat lurched dangerously. Heart still racing, Graham fumbled the push pole Beatrix tossed him. Frantic, Graham picked it up and set to work, driving the pole into the riverbed as hard as he could, one wary eye on the enforcers on the riverbank. When the couple resurfaced, coughing and sputtering, Graham gave them a wink.
Sorry about that. I heard the water's lovely today.
Fighting to get away, Graham pummeled the riverbed, his breathing heavy and sweat dotting his brow. Propelled by the current, they began to pick up speed. Soon they were leaving the enforcers behind. One of them plunged into the water and tried to swim after them, but gave up quickly. Eventually, the tension died down, and it had been several minutes since they had seen an enforcer. Graham slowed a little, catching his breath. He turned to Beatrix, who was eyeing the streets above.
See anything?
She sat back down and crossed her arms.
Nope, it looks like they gave up.
Resting the pole across the boat, Graham relaxed and let out a deep sigh of relief. The sun beat down on them, glistening in the water and casting shimmering reflections on the brick river walls.
This is kind of nice. Just the two of us, taking a relaxing boat ride.
Graham.
Beatrix said, an eyebrow raised.
What?
Graham said, holding out his arms in a shrug.
I'm just saying. The two of us, we make a good team.
You mean I tell you what to do, and you do it without question?
Graham ignored the remark.
Maybe we could even be a thing. I mean, you're pretty attractive. I'm obviously very handsome. We both like crime and hate authority. It's a good match.
Beatrix let out a hearty laugh before she stood again.
I'm sorry, Graham. You're sweet, but no.
She stepped off of the boat onto a passing ladder on the wall. In an instant, she was gone, and Graham was in the boat by himself. He closed his eyes and leaned back with a long sigh. Oh, it never fails, he thought. Girls just don't like you.
What is it?
Graham wondered out loud.
The hair, the glasses, Am I too scrawny?
When Graham opened his eyes, he froze. 6 enforcers stood on a bridge, watching silently as he passed under. In a panic, he grabbed the push-pole and beat at the riverbed, trying to turn around, but it was pointless. There were splashes all around him, and in seconds his boat was overturned. The water was cold. There were hands grabbing him, and before he could react, he was dragged out of the river. With little delicacy, the enforcers dropped him onto the street and bound his hands tight in a thin, unbreakable cord. Graham looked up from the cobbles to see the old reverend priest standing over him, robes still damp.
I want to see him in prison,
he snapped. My parents are gonna kill me, Graham thought.
So, you've just heard the original Chapter 3. That was Christopher Jennings as young Graham, and Rey Solomon as Beatrix as usual, and me as everyone else. There's an old adage in film where what you write is different from what you film, and what you film is different from what you edit. It's always evolving. And this is often why things can get scrapped late in production. This chapter made it through many revisions, but it was scrapped days before it would have aired, and there's a few reasons why. Number one, that really stuck out to me was the tone conflict. It's kind of like a completely different tone from everything else, and that was intentional, but it was just a bad idea. It has this kind of lighthearted, kind of YA energy to it, and it ends up being kind of corny, which coming straight out of the first 2 chapters with Leper and Kia felt really at odds with the book. Now, there is still some of this contrast between Graham's story and Leper's story, but it was just too much, and I was worried that this would really just knock readers right out of the experience. Also, the dialogue was written very poorly. It's this very corny YA dialogue that just didn't get enough editing passes. The actors did a fantastic job because they did exactly what I asked for, but what I asked for was this really corny dialogue. And I was just listening back to it, and I'm like, man, this is so not like the rest of the book. There is examples of dialogue like this that was cut or trimmed out from later chapters just to like streamline everything and make it come together smoother, but this was the one example of a chapter where I would have to cut all of it. There was also a bit of a weird time jump here because we get teenager Graham, and then we jump immediately to like Graham in his early 30s, and then maybe we jump like a year or two at a time after that. And it just felt a little weird to have this included. In fact, the first draft of the book did not have this chapter, and this was added in to kind of flesh out the backstory a little bit. But what I ended up discovering was that it just didn't need to exist. There's very little of consequence that actually happens in this chapter. Other than getting a proper introduction to Beatrix, there's not much. Graham is introduced to, we get reintroduced to him in the next chapter immediately. And Beatrix, we do kind of get introduced to her later, but I had to come in and add a little bit of an expository paragraph immediately preceding that scene with her just to kind of introduce Beatrix now that I had cut out this chapter. I still wish some of the elements of this chapter had made it into the book, but there wasn't time to rewrite and completely re-record this chapter, and it just was easier and better for the story to cut it completely. This introduction to Beatrix is slightly better, and it is kind of cool to see the contrast from teenage Beatrix and middle-aged Beatrix. And it also establishes the relationship between her and Graham in a more concrete way, because when you meet her later on in the full book now, it's kind of like, oh, I guess this is somebody from his past. It is also fun to kind of showcase the reach of Saul's church in the early days by having Saul's enforcers, like the monks with like swishy pants was kind of a fun concept that obviously did not exist anywhere else in the book. There's also further hints at a war that is hinted throughout the book, with mentions of like this dictator and leader and blah, blah, blah. We also get an actual description of what a tret is. And while they do show up later on in the book, we never really get a full concrete description of them. This is where that was, and I didn't have time to put it back in. So it's a shame to cut things like this because obviously this was Christopher Jennings' only scene in the book, and he did a great job. But at the end of the day, it's about what is best for the story. And it just felt like such a tonal shift. And it really felt like it would just knock people straight out because they'd be digging into this dramatic, dreary, apocalyptic storyline only to suddenly be in the Goonies. And that just didn't feel right. This chapter was deemed to be mostly unnecessary, and it was cut. But I still wanted to show it off later down the line so we can get to hear all of the voice actors' lovely work. There is more that I can bring out of the archives, but it was not nearly so complete. So we may see more of that later down the line. But for now, that is all we have for behind the scenes. There will be more coming. Again, if you want to support the show, the best way is to buy the paperback or the ebook. So without further ado, I will see you guys next time.